Atamare kia ora katoto. Graham Peters here from the Electricity Networks Association. It's great to be with you today. And we've got a really exciting session ahead because we're launching the update of the Electricity Networks Association Network Transformation Roadmap. And this has been a lot of work, a continuation of a lot of work. And we're really excited to bring you the 3-year review. With me today, I will have Jonathan Kay. Now, he is the head of our Smart Technology Working Group, which has been steering this work. And it's an illustrious group that he leads. And we've also got Paul Blue. And Paul is the General Manager Network at Counties Energy. Now, Paul will be talking about a specific example where network transformation is supporting consumers. Now, who's on this call? We've invited over many people, ENA members at chief executive level and also at technical levels. We've also invited industry associations, regulators, our important stakeholders. We've invited consumer representatives and other industry people as well to join us. I don't know, some of you might have been with us 3 years ago when we launched the Network Transformation Roadmap with the Minister. And we would have loved to have done that in person again, but things have conspired against us all. It's really important that you ask questions through this because we're ready to answer them. We think there will be quite a few questions, so please lodge your questions as the call comes through. Now, why are we here? So as I mentioned, there's huge changes going on. We're on the cusp or even in the midst of an energy revolution. We're seeing big changes to the way that we've managed electricity for the last 100 years, power going in one direction, building big machines, and it just being delivered in a sort of a passive way. Now it's going to be changing, and that's going to be in different ways. There's new technologies, there's new customer preferences, and there's other things that are happening around how we're actually delivering that power. So it's a very exciting future. And this is an important piece of work for us because transformation is a good way of achieving decarbonisation as well as changing networks and also supporting consumers. Look, that's probably enough on the intro. So I'm going to hand over now to Jonathan Kay, and he's going to talk to us about the 3-year upgrade or update of the Network Transformation Roadmap. Over to you, Jonathan.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Nā mai, haere mai. Thank you, Graham, and welcome everyone to Powering Up for Change, an update on the Network Transformation Roadmap. As Graham said, 3 years since its launch. Look, just a couple of things before I start. So there's no confusion, I'm going to refer to the roadmap throughout as the NTR. I know we all love our acronyms in this industry, so hopefully, like I said, no confusion. And secondly, as Graham said, more than happy to take questions. We'll deal with questions at the end. If a question occurs to you, please just type it in. They'll be collated and we'll come back to them. And I'm sure you'll have some good questions. Look forward to answering those at the conclusion of the presentations. But today I'm going to focus on recent changes that we've made to the NTR as a result of the independent progress review that we had undertaken last year. But I think actually, I want to start with just reminding us of what the NTR is and more importantly, kind of why we need it, right? And why do we need the NTR? Well, the NTR is actually a pathway, and it's a pathway to help networks adapt to this new future Graham's referred to a low carbon future, the one that we all aspire to. And that future, as we know, is going to see increased use of renewable electricity to power industrial heat and to power transportation. And the NTR is kind of underpinned by a core assumption that New Zealand will meet its decarbonisation goals. Essentially, we're committed to net zero by 2050. And for myself and those of us that have been involved throughout this process with the roadmap, it's really pleasing to see kind of growing and widespread recognition that electricity networks are part of the solution. We're key enablers of that transition to a low carbon future. But what I think is kind of really important to realise is we should be under no illusion that that transition is going to be challenging. It will be difficult. And that's largely because we're in this period of uncertainty. So none of us really know what that long-term future is going to look like. But we also knew in developing the roadmap that we couldn't afford to wait. Yeah. And fortunately, in New Zealand, you know, we're blessed with very high levels of renewable electricity generation. But I think something that sometimes we lose a bit of sight of, we're also coming off a low base. You know, 1.7% penetration by connection of solar PV, well under 1% of the light vehicle fleet electrified. So we do have time to execute. And the NTR recognises this. We're in this period, it covers a period up to 2030, so essentially the next sort of decade. And in this period, it's all about building the foundations. And we need strong foundations to support the transition. And the 19 actions that make up the NTR are least regrets actions. They're for networks to implement, to be prepared for that new energy future, whatever that future might look like. When we launched the NTR 3 years ago, we deliberately avoided talking about distribution system operator or the DSO role. But things have changed a lot in the last 3 years, and I'm certainly hearing more reference to DSO these days. And so I'm powering up for change, which is our response and our updated NTR. We openly acknowledge it. And while the DSO role is yet to be defined fully in a New Zealand context, and that is important, context is important, I think it's important to know that the actions in the NTR are deliberately designed to support and enable a DSO. So the NTR is essentially a plan for DSO preparedness and readiness. Just going to take you through a little bit of a history before the NTR, before I talk about the changes in powering up for change. And it's been 3 years since we launched the NTR with the minister back in April 2019. And gosh, the world was a different place then, wasn't it? And the NTR took 18 months development by the ENA Smart Technology Working Group. And as I mentioned, it is at its heart a set of least regrets actions that enable networks to prepare pretty much over the next decade to fulfill their roles of increased electrification. And we developed the roadmap in a New Zealand context, but its findings, its conclusions, and the underlying actions are pretty much consistent with other pieces of work. I'm thinking of things like the Australian NTR, the UK Open Networks program, and that should be no surprise because everybody's facing the same challenge, albeit from a different starting position. So last year, 2 years into this, at the early stages of implementation, we undertook an independent progress review just to see how networks were getting started with the NTR. And Dr. Alan Miller was engaged to conduct the review. And you'll recall Alan has been instrumental in terms of working with the STWG and developing the NTR and kind of working through that. Just to remind us all of his findings, firstly, Dr. Miller found that the network sector was strongly committed to its role in terms of enabling New Zealand to meet its decarbonisation goals. So that's a big tick. We're all supportive of that. However, what he did find was implementation progress was mixed. In some areas it was good, some areas a bit slow. Yeah. And that's led us to where we are today, powering up for change. So the STWG has carefully considered Dr. Miller's progress review and pretty much agreed in the main with his findings, although, as I did note earlier, growth in distributed generation, penetration and electric vehicle uptake has been a little bit slower than perhaps expected. So that partially explains some of the pace of implementation. And I should also note that whilst we considered Alan's review really carefully, we also took the opportunity as a group to really critically examine the NTR. And the group's response is powering up for change. Yeah, it's an updated NTR. You can see an outline of the report there. I'm told it's available on the ENA website. So if you're interested in downloading the report and looking at it in more detail, please do so. I'm going to take you through some of the key changes shortly. But in summary, there are no changes to the NTR actions. So no additions, no removals. The NTR is fit for purpose. But as we work through this exercise, there was a widespread recognition of a need to make the NTR actions clearer. And that's really to assist networks in implementing them. And that's really important because we're now entering a period of implementation. The rubber really needs to hit the road now. You know, we're 8 years out from 2030. There's you know, a lot of, the world's changed a lot in terms of, and especially changed a lot in New Zealand in terms of our focus on, you know, accelerating the low carbon transition. Yeah, and so networks really need to start to make concerted progress and building that new capability that's required for the future. And as I talked about this last year, and as it's become apparent, collaboration is going to be key. And so I'm going to share details with you shortly of a new initiative that the ENA is actually implementing to sit alongside the NTR. So now I'm going to take you through the key changes in the NTR update. This table is directly out of Powering Up for Change. So if you want to get more detail of it, like I said, go to the ENA website, download the report. I'm going to take you through these changes in a bit more detail, but they cover 5 key areas. And those areas are prioritization, dependencies, regulatory reliance, collaboration and sharing, and targets. And I'm going to start with prioritization. I think you can see that quite well. What we've done is regroup the actions. So if you recall, the original NTR had 7 work streams, and what we've done is just reorganize those to provide some greater clarity and focus. And so while all the actions in the NTR need to be implemented, there are a core set of actions that are fundamental. Those are shown in the blue boxes here, right? And they center around information, procurement, standardization, and cost-reflective pricing, remembering that cost-reflective pricing, whilst a key part of the NTR, the actions there are being addressed as part of the ENA's distribution pricing working group. The NTR is fundamentally about developing new capabilities. So these are things that networks need to build for the future. And so, and these core areas are all focused on exactly that, the development of new capabilities. So it should be no surprise that the bulk of the actions sit here. So 15 of the NTR, 19 NTR actions sit across these areas. The next group of actions, which are shown in the green boxes, so asset management and consumer driven, so new loads, and we're seeing new loads and new applications emerge as people convert things like industrial process heat from coal to renewable electricity. They're about enhancement of existing capability. So this is capability that networks have, but it needs to be developed further to meet future needs. And finally, there are 2 supporting actions shown in the red boxes at the bottom there. Monitor uncertainties. This is just making sure that the roadmap continues to be fit for purpose, that the external environment is not changing enough that we need to review that. And this was something that Alan did in his review last year and concluded that, no, we're still on track here. The roadmap is still fit for purpose. And the second area is the innovation stock take, which is a new initiative that I'm going to talk to in a little bit more detail. And these are supporting actions. And what's important to note here is these won't be done by networks, going to be carried out on behalf of networks by the ENA, which I think is the right way to approach this. So talked about prioritization, but another area that's really critical is dependencies. And as you can imagine, a lot of the NTR actions are dependent on other actions. This is especially so for actions relating to data. And Paul's going to talk to you shortly about some of the things that counties are managing to do because they've got access to their smart meter data. I think you'll find that really insightful. Yeah. So we've kind of grouped the NTR actions in those core areas into 3 categories. And the first one of those is foundational. So these are actions which are critical. Can't stress this enough. They enable downstream actions. Networks need to be focused on these actions first, right? The next set of actions, as the name suggests, they're actually dependent, right? So these are actions that are dependent on another action or actions being completed first. And if you go to the Powering Up for Change report, we've done quite a bit of work about showing what actions need to be done collectively to enable another downstream action. So hopefully there's much greater clarity. And there are a few actions, finally, that are independent. They're standalone actions. They're actions where networks have a bit more flexibility, not just in when they do them, but how they do them. They might do them collectively with people. But look, I'm talking a lot about networks and actions, and the NTR isn't just about networks implementing actions. Networks will need support, and some of the support needs to come from regulators. And when we went through this exercise and looked at it, we noted there were 4 key actions that were dependent on precursor actions from regulators. These are understanding new distributed generation, DER connection codes, appliance and DER equipment standards, and cybersecurity and autonomous DERs, right? And these all relate to standards and the development and the adoption of standards. And they've been grouped together under that standardization core area, right? And look, progress by networks is going to be dependent on regulators taking the first step here, taking the initial actions to enable the networks to actually adopt and then enforce these standards. And this is a really important point, and I do want to stress it a little bit, and I'm not getting at regulators here. We just felt that we needed to make things clearer so we can work closely with the regulators to implement these. Because not only does delay from regulators inhibit progress from networks, but it has a sort of unintended consequence where if there's a delay, it can cause networks to react to their situation, impose their own rules and guidelines. And we don't really want this. It leads to this lack of consistency of approach across the sector. So we've drawn that out and made it a lot clearer in terms of the NTR. I've mentioned collaboration and sharing. And look, in Alan's review, if there was one thing that came out really strongly as a common theme, it was that the biggest challenge in our sector currently is access to skills and resources. Yeah, and wherever I go, I hear this and I see this. Finding talent, finding good people is really difficult. It's a challenge. So if we're going to succeed as a sector, it's only going to come from working closely together. And I think this is one of the areas where the STWG's view diverged a little bit from Dr. Miller's, right? For the group, you know, this is where the power of the 27 networks really comes to the fore. It makes sense for one network to develop capability in an area and then share its learnings and intellectual property with others. And I think a really good example of that is the really good work that Aurora have done around procurement of non-network solutions. And not only has the work been really good, but the fact that they've willingly shared their resources and their learnings and what they've developed with others for people like PowerCo and Vector who are continuing to develop and evolve this is a really good example of how we can all collectively lift the bar by focusing on some areas and then, you know, transferring that knowledge to others. Yeah. So greater collaboration is going to be key. I'm seeing more collaboration than I've ever seen in the sector, right? But one of the things that was really apparent to us as the STWG is that collaboration really relies on awareness. You need to know what's happening. And so this has been a catalyst by this new initiative by the ENA, an innovation stocktake. And so this is just putting a bit more structure around monitoring the many things that are occurring around the sector. And how this will work, well, the ENA will survey its members to determine what innovation-related activities are currently being undertaken. Looking probably to do this on an annual basis, but we might do this a little more frequently as we start and kind of get the ball rolling. And the purpose of the stocktake is twofold. Firstly, and most importantly, it's all about, like I said, sharing the results with ENA members just to raise collective awareness. So people can know other parties that are further down the path and dealing with some of the issues that they're currently confronting, or they can get together with networks that are at the same stage with them. It's just around making sure we're all aware of what's happening. But secondly, and this is I don't want to understate this is important too, right? It also enables the ENA and for everyone to step back and just identify any key areas within the roadmap where there's not a lot of focus, there's little or no activity occurring, right? And so it gives us a kind of a sort of high level view of that. So it serves two purposes, and I think it's going to be really good. I'm pleased to say that the first stocktake is actually in progress. So, you know, as we get results through there, we'll find a way to collate them and share them with appropriate parties. So I've been talking a lot about, you know, how the steps we've taken in powering up for change to make it a lot clearer for networks to get on with implementing the actions under the roadmap. That's important. But, you know, the other thing that's important is how we're going to measure progress here. And if you recall, the original NTR had a series of milestones at 2, 5, and 10-year periods. There's a lot of information there about where we felt networks needed to be. It was probably a little elaborate, possibly quite confusing. So what we've done is replace that with a 5-stage maturity model. And you can see that on the slide in front of you, going from initial, emergent to developing, mature, and then leading, right? And the maturity model really allows individual networks to assess where they're at on that journey. Yeah, and that journey in terms of developing that new capability that we need to support the transition to a low carbon future. Unlike the original NTR though, what we've also done in terms of the maturity model is we've linked it to the external environment, so the stages of DER penetration. And this is also really useful. So not only will networks be able to measure themselves and assess where they're at in terms of that journey, but they'll be able to look at what's happening around them in terms of changes to the external environment and know whether they're really where they need to be in terms of the pace of change, in terms of DER adoption. And so I think it's going to be a really powerful tool for not just networks, but people involved in networks, from boards, senior management down, to actually just have a look at where we're at on that journey. So I've given you a really quick overview in terms of powering up for change. And as I mentioned, the report's available on the ENA website. So please, I encourage you to go and look at it. If you've got questions after looking at the report, or more than happy if you want to reach out to myself or to the ENA, Richard LeGros, and raise any questions. Of course, if you've got questions today that you want answered, take the opportunity to type them in and we'll deal with them shortly. But as I said before, I've talked at a kind of conceptual level around what we're doing to make the NTR easier for people to understand, because we're at a phase where we need to really be making traction around implementation. But I think it's far more powerful if we showed you some of the good work that's been done by networks. And I wanted to focus around data, because access to data and improved visibility of the low voltage network, from my way of thinking, is probably one of the most important, if not the most important parts of the NTR. So I'm going to introduce Paul Blue to you. I know Graham's mentioned Paul, but Paul's the General Manager Network at Counties Energy. And Counties Energy have their own smart meters. They have access to that data. And so Paul's going to give you an overview of some of the exciting things that counties have been doing with that data, and just show you how powerful having access to that data is. So Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. So yeah, I'm going to talk about how Counties Energy have utilised smart meters and how that relates to the NTR as essentially a really core element to its progress. Smart meter use it really will enable New Zealand's ability to facilitate the future of energy use. So one of the key aspects in the future of EDBs is the ability to visualize and understand the flows of energy at the low voltage. Typically, we manage predominantly at the high voltage, but in the future, we're going to need to be able to see what is connected and how these devices are interacting with the networks. The visibility of the low voltage networks is a core focus area of the NTR. And for us, it really is helping us make decisions around our assets, but also, as we'll see later on with what we're doing around the uncertainty about what might be connected, is that we're using them to enable decision making on how we invest appropriately in the future. So at Counties Energy, we are very fortunate that we have access to the data from the majority of meters in our network. We wanted to build a system that not only managed outages for us, but more importantly, the outcome was a better customer experience, and that also put customer functionality at the heart of the system. We take in data from the smart meters, we take in data from the GIS, the customer management system, which is Salesforce in our case, Navision, which is our data registry, eRoad, which is around our where are our vehicles at, our applications out in the field, and Ripple Control, etc. And what we've built is an infrastructure and network data interface, affectionately known as INDY, which really is a cloud-based outage dispatch system, but it gives customers, they get to see a lot of what we see, and that informs them of what is it they're dealing with. So what does that look like? This slide here, I put up a screenshot from my phone from the February storm that we've recently had. So in a storm situation, or any situation, you can go look at this real time. You can look up and you can see what is out on the network at the moment. It shows you planned outages. In this case, in the case of a storm, you could look at this and you could click on one of the little red bubbles there that might be by your area, and you would be able to see what we were dealing with, and it would automatically generate a work order. So that then would tell customers where they sat in the queue. So it would tell them, are we on their way, then what the expected restoration time is. We don't need, customers are now ringing us less and less because they will get more from this map because it is generated from smart meters. And I think one of the key messages I would say here is when things are happening, this is very, very accurate. It tells us, it aggregates up to a transformer level, and it will tell us you have an outage here. We do not need to wait for customers to ring and tell us. We already know. In the case of a day that isn't a storm, what customers really want to know, they want to know, how long is my power expected to be out for? And this thing here will tell them that. The work order is automatically generated, but also if we want to check that the power has gone back on, we press a button and it produces a ping, and that ping will tell us things like on that particular smart meter what the voltage is: current, active power, apparent power, reactive power. And we can see, is there power on the premises, so that if a customer rings up and says, I haven't got power, we can say, we know that it's within the premises, it's not on the network. And so thereby greater customer experience of, when we're trying to, in a storm situation, go to other customers, it's not being redirected unnecessarily. So there are other things the system does for us. So the majority of what you saw previously is that the customer sees what we see. We're able to do a lot more with the system, of course. We are able to extract data over longer periods to tell us about what is the consumption. Do we have voltage breaches in places that we're going to need to go and look at the assets in that area, and be that from DER or any other perspective that we may have an issue with. Distributed generation. We can see where distributed generation has been connected, and that is necessary from a hosting capacity, but also from a worker safety scenario as well, where if we think a line is dead and we're trying to work on it, if there's an injection coming into that, we will know if that is there and it hasn't been alerted to us. Some other really good uses of the system is around lone workers. So we bring in the E-road data to this, and we are able to see where lone workers are, which allows for a safety of our workers as well. So that's from the Indie perspective. So that's from the tool that we built. But there are other things that we are able to do with smart meters. And one of the ones that we've talked about previously is around broken neutrals. And smart meters have been amazing from a customer safety perspective. We do not typically it would have been a customer would have rang out and said, oh, I've got a tingle off my tap or something like that. We are able to look at impedances of the network around smart meters, and we can see where there are broken neutrals, and we proactively go out to customers' premises to say, look, you have an issue here. And we are able to deal with that issue without the customers ever experiencing a zap, as it were. So the next thing that we're working on with the use of smart meters is, and this is really comes to the core about low voltage visibility and what the NTR is talking about. So we've partnered with a company, Answer, and we are looking at what our network is going to be capable of under different DER, either load or injection scenarios. So instead of in the past where you would look at a very conservative calculation about what you can do, we are looking at real time. We are looking at what is happening to a transformer, and we're saying, righto, if we were to have a certain amount of EVs here, what are the branch constraints that we are going to have to deal with? Now, this also means that EDBs often have not got the low voltage data that we're going to need from the future. So as well as using smart meters, we also have to go out and collect that data. And we can then use that to say, righto, I've got X amount of EVs here. What will I need to upgrade, or what incentives do we need to give customers to perhaps move their charging patterns or anything that is connected to it? Another thing that this will be able to do, we can do with smart meters, is look at, we know where EVs are, and we can do that by looking at where do you see 7 kilowatt loads. You can aggregate that up to transformers and say, okay, I'm going to have a problem here because I can see this. And I understand that there are a number of parties out there that would like other agencies to tell EDBs where where EVs are in order to be able to plan, we don't need to. We can use the smart meter data to tell us that information and thereby use that to invest appropriately in advance of when we see an issue. So what does it look like? Oh, have I gone too far? I have. There we are. Okay, so what we see here is we get a map, and it shows us what phases ICPs are on, what houses are connected to what phase. But we also get essentially a traffic light view of assets about which ones are going to require attention in the future. In our case, at this early stage, we've completed a very small snapshot of the network, and we're going to continue that on. It looks like transformers are going to be the first thing. Cables and overhead assets, not so much. But it really is giving us that view of where will we need to plan in the future in order to allow our customers to be able to do what they want with the future of energy that is coming towards not just us, them as well. So that there is a relatively brief overview of some of the uses that we are doing with smart meters. And look, smart meters are an essential tool that are going to enable customers to be at the center of the transformational journey that we are on. And the use does underpin a number of the actions that the NTR goes into in order to facilitate DER connections to the network. And also when we talk about the future of DSO as well. These are visualizing at the low voltage is such a necessary thing to be able to do. So thank you.
Kia ora, Paul. Look, I would want to acknowledge Paul's contribution. He's on the Smart Technology Working Group, which is about 20 people from the membership, steered, of course, by Jonathan. I'd like to acknowledge all the work that they've done in preparing this. And also, as Jonathan mentioned, the work of Dr. Alan Miller last year. He's been a huge contributor to reviewing the previous roadmap and updating it with us through his review. It's really important to say, though, that this isn't a sort of a silo project. So what is also fed into this updated roadmap is last year, ENA did a complete strategy reset. So we started with a blank piece of paper and worked with our stakeholders and our members, did a full stakeholder audit, and some really strong messages came through into a brand new strategy. So that strategy also feeds into this document. And again, those three things around climate, collaboration, and customer. Those are the three priority areas. So thank you. Look, we are getting some questions coming through. One is about stakeholder engagement. And as I mentioned, we have had considerable input and feedback. Transpower is actually on the Smart Technology Working Group too. So they're a really important partner with us working on this future. So we do also, last year, we did actually engage with the important regulators and government agencies, the Commerce Commission, the Electricity Authority, on what their perceptions were and what needed to be done. So we're getting some good questions coming through. One of the questions that we have received is how, and this is from Nicholas Vessiot actually at Transpower. I hope I'm allowed to say who's putting these questions up. Nicholas has asked, how is this work going to coordinate and integrate with the existing work streams in flight? And he's talking about some of the really important work that's been done at the Electricity Authority, principally by the IPAG, and also he talks about the Future Security and Resilience Program, ECA, and other sorts of things like the Flex Forum. Look, I'm going to answer that one, and Jonathan and Paul, you can chime in too if you wish. But there's a lot of crossover. We are all actually paddling in the same direction to the outcomes that we want to achieve. We are pretty much in alignment about how we're going to where we're going. So we've all got our ideas on how that's going to proceed, and I know that there's various ways of doing that, but the best way of coordinating our activities to reach the same goal is to make sure that we're talking to each other, and we do. We'll take any opportunity to talk to whoever it is. We'll come and present them. I've just received an invitation to present at the Authority, the Security and Reliability Council. So it's about making sure that the lines are open. We're actually very connected here because there's so many of us. We can actually reach out and connect well with a whole lot of agencies through all our different people. So that's the answer to that one. Is there anything else you wanted to add, you guys? No. So I've got another question here, and this is from Mark Gilbert. And if you know Mark, he's very much involved in Drive Electric. To Paul, are you saying we don't need smart EV chargers in New Zealand, given you can review demand from EVs?
My answer to that is we most certainly do need smart EV chargers in New Zealand. That use of smart meters that we use is more about managing what asset capacity we're going to need for the in that area. As far as the smart side of EV charging, that is certainly going to be needed by whatever incentive or whatever control that becomes standard within New Zealand. At the moment, that doesn't exist. So no, to your question, I believe that we most certainly do need smart EV chargers.
Okay, I've got another question here, and this is to Graham and Jonathan. For you, and this is presumably me, what is the most important single thing about this transformation roadmap? And I can answer that really, really easily. For me, the most important thing is the collaboration and the cooperation of the members in actually achieving a roadmap. And this is really important, because it shows that there is a lot of discussion and networking and opportunity to explore the future and then agree that future without being too prescriptive. But it also highlights the importance of coming up with joint solutions so that we can actually tackle those things. So for me, that's the most important thing. It's also a demonstration of how important the Electricity Networks Association is to the members and coordinating that activity. Jonathan, did you have a key thing that you wanted to say?
Firstly, great answer, Graham. I absolutely agree with that. Sometimes we focus really heavily on the technical aspects and they're important, but to my mind, collaboration is like the secret sauce. And it's really pleasing to see that innovation stocktake underway and just making people more aware of what's happening, because I think that's going to be very powerful. If I was going to add one more thing, and I think you're seeing it because you're getting a pile of questions, Paul, but access to data is so powerful, right? It's something we've worked hard on. There's more work to be done in that space. Getting real information around what's actually happening in the parts of your network that are getting affected really gives you a big step up. And I know there are plenty of networks that are really envious of the likes of counties and well, because they're well on that journey. And so that'd be the other thing, but you're right, Graham. We all need to pull together on this. And I'm seeing lots of that, and we just need to keep going with it.
Yep.
I'd like to add something to that. I think EDBs, we don't tell the story enough about how much we collaborate. As soon as we find out that somebody's done something really good, we often have calls, VidCons, and really go through what have they done, and everyone does share. So, we're talking about smart meters today, but in the past month, I've had numerous conversations of various things that we collaborate on with other EDBs. So
we have some more questions coming in, and some of them are actually for you, Paul. They're asking questions about your penetration and your network. Now, I think it's really important here. Very few EDBs actually have their own smart meters. So this is like a gift really that they've put in, and good on them. But a lot of EDBs would be very, very jealous of those meters. But it sort of underscores the fact though, that it's really important that we have access to the data. So that, and there's 2 smart meters presumably on counties network, but there's in many others there's just the one. So having access to that data unlocks a whole lot of potential around whether it's LV visibility or just digitalization, etc. So That's really important. So Paul, you've got a question there about your penetration
Yeah.
of your meters, and also is there any plan to use the smart meter data to support homeowners to improve energy efficiency?
So for the first one around penetration, we are extremely fortunate. We're way over 90%. So we don't actually have to fill in that many gaps. And where you do, you can build an algorithm and then go back and check that if you want to. And generally we find that that algorithm fills it in quite well. But in our case, we have that extremely high penetration. So we don't really need to do that all that much. Now, the next question is a really good one, and that is how can you use smart meters to even address a subject like energy poverty? And the answer to that is something that we will need to look at, is because you can see ICPs and go, well, how much are they using, etc. We could do that. It's not going to happen this year, but it is certainly something we can look at.
So another question that's come in is around how is this going to support consumers? And I think that's the most important question that we can ask. And the answer for me is that this is actually a way of supporting customers for connecting their new technologies to the network. And that's solar technology, that's batteries, and new loads like EVs, obviously. EVs are getting bigger and bigger, and they're going to be wanting greater ability to charge. So as Paul mentions, 7 kilowatt loads are going to become more and more common just for EVs. So it's about that, but it's also, as we have energy concentration, which is where we reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, putting petrol in our tank, using gas, electricity is going to become more and more important as the sole energy source for customers. So reliability is going to become much more important, because if people don't have electricity, then they're not going to be able to drive their car, and they're not going to be able to light their home or heat their home. So really important that we have enhanced reliability. So at the grid level or the EDB level, it'll be about enhancing that reliability through, for example, grid level batteries, distributed energy resources, or local generation to support customers to make sure that they are actually able to tank up their car. Did you guys want to add anything to that?
Look, from my perspective, it's really necessary from customers. I mean, around me, I'm watching people buy EVs. I'm getting questions about, oh, can we put a fast charger in here? And so really it is all about, we're now being looked at as a replacement for what they currently use, and to facilitate that. We can't facilitate that unless we know what's going on, and from the smart meter point of view, but also from that aggregation point of view. So that's what the NTR deals with. It really does come down to customer expectations of the future, and are we in front of that?
Yeah, and look, to just endorse those statements, it's really exciting because, like, for most of my time in this sector, change has been driven by regulators, and now the change is getting driven by customers. And the points you made, Graham, are really pertinent. And when we first started the whole NTR process, and I wish I had the words right in front of me, but our objective was just to make sure that customers can continue to connect and operate whatever they like. That is their expectation. And then, like you say, Graham, as their dependency increases, their expectations around reliability increase, and we do a fantastic job, but we're just going to have to do better, because people are going to be reliant on it for everything through to transportation. And I think I mentioned we're coming off a low base, but we do need to keep moving in terms of that. And that's what the roadmap does. It tries to keep the network sector ahead of what we know is going to happen.
We've got a question here from Marianne Mitchell, and it's asking, the ENA's focus on collaboration between network companies is great. Are there plans to share the innovation stocktake and results of individual innovations with wider stakeholders? Jonathan, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, no, look, that's absolutely the intent. And just want to say there are two audiences here. So in the first instance, the real power from the stock take is to make sure that networks know what other networks are doing. Paul's talked about it in terms of his interaction with others that are coming to him, or he's reaching out with problems. I see it at the SDWG every time we meet. And so we want to get that bit right. But yes, we also want to share it with wider stakeholders. And Paul referred to this too. I think as a sector, sometimes we're a little bit guilty of just getting our head down and doing, and not making people aware of what's going on. And that's good from two levels. Firstly, it just helps show people what's happening, but it invites comment and feedback. And I think that's also really important, right? We are in this stage of uncertainty. I defy anyone to say what that future is going to look like in the long term, but we'll only get there by sharing and being more transparent and open. So yes, that's the case. I'd just say, bear with us while we work through this exercise, because the first time of this, we're just getting up to speed with it. But like we've done with all aspects of the NTR, we're very open. We really want to engage. We really want to share things, because that's when you get the best outcomes.
Thanks, Jonathan. One of the other questions I've got here is that the NTR update says that this sector needs the support of regulators, and what do EDBs want regulators to do? Look, there's a few things on the list, and some of them are actually underway. Like, for example, the Electricity Authority updated regulatory settings last year. I think there was a clear message back to the authority around Part 6. So that, that's around the connection of DER. So that sort of thing needs improvement. It's very much out of date. The Commerce Commission is just kicking off a review of the input methodologies and also ID, information disclosure. And we're really encouraged to see that a high priority item for them is around decarbonisation and how is that going to work. So we're working with the Commission very positively on that work, and it's just kicking off really. So those are the sorts of things that need to change. And an example, 3 years ago when we released the NTR, an example of a success was in encouraging pricing reform, distribution pricing reform, and removing a key barrier to that reform was getting rid of the low fixed charge regulations, which were a huge handbrake on pricing reform. And we've managed to succeed in doing that with the support, I must say, of MB and the authority and the minister, and that's gradually coming off. So that's going to kickstart more pricing reform opportunity. So that's an example of a success that we've seen in the last 3 years to support network transformation. Is there anything you guys want to add? Okay, look, I'm out of questions at the moment. Look, I'm going to close off now. I'd really like to thank Jonathan and Paul for their presentations today, and I'd like to thank you for watching. This is a really important piece of work for ENA members, and this is not a flash in the pan. As clearly we've been doing this work now for about 5 years. We think it's really important to come back to our stakeholders and say, hey, this is where we've come from and this is where we're going. This document is not a substantial change. I would call it a course correction and a reprioritization. And there's plenty more work to do if we're going to achieve all the things that we need to achieve in making the networks much more modern and customer focused, and using the opportunities around digitalization and technology. We're going to a great place, and I think we should all be really proud of what we're all trying to achieve to support consumers and climate goals. So I'm going to finish off now. Thanks very much for watching.